then Ulysses, you're just gonna have to jump. Ulysses is 12 years old. These are our 3 kids. Very grateful to you all for the hospitality and the warmth with which we've been received every time we've come to Iowa. We're going to give our talk and listen to folks ask questions inside. I think you'll be able to hear, I hope. But if you stick around, we'll come back afterwards for anybody who'd like to say hello or take a picture, right, Connor?
Absolutely.
We'll have time to do
Yep,
that?
definitely.
Yeah, sound good?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So thank you all very much. We'll see you in just a little bit, okay?
All right.
All right, gracias.
We're going to head this way.
All right, bye-bye. Good luck
back
again.
down
Thank
this
you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah.
All right, we're going to head this way, guys.
Okay, we're coming back out this way. All right, you want to go to you? Hey,
Hi.
how are you?
How are you?
Good to see you.
Nice to meet you.
Hey, buddy.
You say hi?
What's up? Do you want to do this? Do you want to just wave? You want to blink twice to say hello? Hey. What are you reading?
It's called Empire of Storms. It's the 6th in the series.
Oh, cool. And what's the series called?
Throne of Glass.
Okay. Sounds cool. Like Harry Potter, magical fantasy stuff?
Medieval.
Like that. Right on. I'll have to take a look at it.
My daughter's just had her birthday.
She turned 11 on the 23rd.
Awesome.
Yeah, so, yeah. What are your all's ages?
13.
And 10.
And 10. Okay. Super cool. Right on. No problem. All right, well, we're gonna go inside, and we're gonna come back out afterwards to say hello to anybody who's hanging out. If you'd like to. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Appreciate you being here. Yeah. Hey. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it. Hi.
Hi.
Beto. Thanks for joining us.
Tanya. Nice to meet you.
Hey, good to see you.
Oh, this is bad weather to be out in. Hi there.
Oh, great. Amy. Isabel.
We need you in the house, though. We're sorry we have bad weather for you, aren't you? It's so nice to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, how nice of you. Good call. Yes. Come on in. Please. Hi, and you're Henry? That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And
Molly,
this is
did you see
Molly.
Bill?
Hi, Molly. Nice to meet you. And there's Lucy somewhere.
Hi, Molly.
How are you?
Good to see you again.
Oh, yeah.
How are
good to
you?
see you. I'm fine.
Thank you for all the emails and the encouragement along the
Yeah,
way.
well, you're welcome.
It works.
I hope you do.
No, I love it. It makes me better. Yeah. Hi. How are
My
you?
husband, Dan.
Good to see you, Dan. Yeah.
And you've
Really
already met
appreciate
my
it.
first and only grandchild.
Yeah, Will. The mighty Will.
Will.
Yeah.
It's not bothering him at all.
No.
Not at all, so that's great. We are so glad to have you here, you know that? You make it really great. But we could go inside with them.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Now, do you want to go this way? No, wait a
We're
second,
gonna
I'm
follow
not your
you.
advance. Do you want to go in this way, Christian? Okay.
Hey, Joan. Hey, Joan, you want to come on up?
Good to see you. Thank you very much.
I'm like crouching.
Good to see you. Of course. Hey, thanks for watching. Yeah. And your election is August 6th. And they moved it to a place where it was inconvenient for students, faculty, So is Iowa State the only major school in the district? I really see it. Okay, cool. Let's mention that. Yeah, to everybody. You're greeting all the folks.
We're going to make space for you.
Hi there, okay.
Hey, the family want to come on in?
Okay, fine.
Thank you for having us here.
Glad to be here.
Do you have the mic?
Thank you, Dan.
Christian.
We're good.
Does she have the mic?
They're gonna get seated first.
That's real hospitality. No, we're from the Chihuahuan Desert, so we don't know what this stuff is. That's all we know. This stuff feels awesome. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Coming right
We've got babies.
Babies, hopefully then be too disruptive.
now. Hey, Daniel Patrick.
Okay, Dan, why don't you go ahead?
Hola. How are you? Doing good. Is it nice in here?
It is nice and toasty warm, yeah.
They did. Thank you. All right.
I want to, if you start thinking, you know, I wondered, is this working? I thought to myself, you know, who does Beto O'Rourke remind me of? And there was three people who said, Robert Kennedy. Yeah. And I said, well, maybe, you know, he's tall, he's handsome. I think it sounds a little bit, well, maybe he looks a little bit like Robert Kennedy. And the other thing is, you know, it's not just because his given name is Robert. So there's the second Robert, I thought maybe something. But it's also because, like Robert Kennedy, Beto O'Rourke is tough, hardworking, and yes, courageous. As Attorney General, Robert Kennedy took on the mob. I remember, I was a kid. It was pretty scary stuff. And as a third-term congressman from Texas, Robert Francis Beto O'Rourke took on the most disliked, and I might add, the meanest, long-term senator from Texas, Ted Cruz.
Who?
Yeah. His guts, I tell you. But also is now a third-term congressman from Texas, Robert Francis Beto O'Rourke, has taken on the most dishonest, immoral,
Trading out.
There we go.
immoral, I believe, immoral, I'm going to back up in that sentence. Turns out that just as it was just a trial run when he went after Ted Cruz. Beto O'Rourke decided to take on the most dishonest, immoral, and incompetent president in the history of America, Donald Trump. And Beto is like another strong, bipartisan leader and another Robert. There are a lot of people here that may remember Bob Ray. I worked with Bob Ray on a diversity day in my daughter's middle school in Callahan in Des Moines. And the two of us worked pretty hard and checked to see how many kids were from foreign countries or their parents were from foreign countries. We had 54. We were shocked. We ended up buying flags, and we flew flags, and they still fly in the cafeteria there. We got flags from all the countries. I might add, except for one, Tajikistan. And there were two boys made their own flag and carried it into the diversity day. It was fantastic. This man is like Bob Ray. That's why I support him. It's like I knew him when he was younger. Beto O'Rourke not only cares about himself, he not only respects every American's constitutional rights and is loyal to his country, he also cares about the vulnerable and needy, and in particular, the immigrant families that have been separated on the border. To me, that's one of the most offensive and horrific things I've ever seen in this country. I can't believe it every day. I can't believe it. But I know that if Beto O'Rourke is our president, those children will be reunited with their parents. You can tell I feel strongly about this. Beto O'Rourke represents the best of what America is, the best of what Iowans are, as Bob Ray did, and the best of who we are as people. I'm very lucky and very honored to introduce Beto O'Rourke.
Joan, thank you. That was incredibly kind and very important to focus us on the moral issue of this moment right now, which happens to be very close to home for us in El Paso, Texas. And so grateful that all the way from Ames, Iowa, you're trying to make sure that we are paying attention to what is happening in our name on the U.S.-Mexico border at this moment. And not just now at this moment. We met earlier in the campaign and we shared contact information. You've been staying in touch with me and making sure that I am focused on that and making sure that I bring other Americans into this conversation and into an understanding about just what is happening at this moment of truth. So grateful to you and to Dan for opening up your home, making sure that all of us could join together today, not for a candidate, not for a political party, but for our country. That is what has brought us all out at this moment. And so we thank you. I want to thank Ross Wilburn, who greeted us as we came in. Ross, are you here?
I'm down here.
Ross, there's Ross. Ross, you can come forward so everybody can see you. Ross is on the ballot August 6th for the State House here in Iowa. Critically important to get behind Ross. Now, you never, ever want to ascribe motive, but you have to ask yourself why Kim Reynolds set the election date 2 weeks before students come back into classes at Iowa State. If that is an attempt at voter suppression, then it is incumbent upon all of us to overcome that suppression by not just voting, but by making sure that we're getting in touch with our classmates, our coworkers, our friends, our family members, to make sure that we bring them to the polls on August 6th, a very decisive election for Iowa. The only way that we have the basis to build a majority going in to 2020. So grateful that you're running, Ross. So grateful for every one of you who is supporting him. Now let's make sure that we get everyone else out to the polls on August 6th. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, very grateful. Kelsey, who greeted us when we came in as well. So many friendly people. We just flew in from Texas. We went from El Paso to Houston, from Houston to Des Moines, and then in Des Moines at the airport, we were picked up by Mustafa in an RV. First time we've had a chance to travel in an RV in the campaign, and in part we're in the RV because we've got the entire O'Rourke family. This is my wife, Amy, who is here. Next to her is Ulysses, Molly, and Henry down here. Stand up, Henry. 12, 11, and 8 years old, and the parents here in the room know what this is like. As we're driving, there's this beautiful lightning storm, and this stuff that we're not so familiar with in the Chihuahuan desert that you all call rain that is falling down from the sky. We make the kids put down the electronics and just look out the window at this beautiful countryside that we're driving through, and they're able to keep it together for 2 or 3 minutes before they start itching for the electronics and fighting with each other. In other words, providing some potential birth control for Mustafa. He's having second thoughts about having kids of his own after experiencing the O'Rourkes for the 45-minute drive over here. So this Sunday, and this is something that I know if Joan were in El Paso, she would have joined us with. We went across the Paso Norte Bridge that connects El Paso, Texas, to our sister city of Ciudad Juarez. These two communities form the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere. There are 3 million of us speaking 2 languages from 2 countries, 2 histories, who are joined, not separated, by the Rio Grande River. It's extraordinary, and it is the source of so much of our success, whether you measure it economically, or the quality of life that we have come to enjoy in El Paso, or the fact that my hometown is one of the safest cities in the United States of America. It has been for 20 years running, before there was a wall, after there was a wall, in fact, a little bit less safe after there was a wall. And we are safe not despite, but because we're a city of immigrants. and asylum seekers and refugees, and because we are joined at the hip, literally, with Mexico and Ciudad Juarez. That is the source of our success, of our strength, and I would argue our security and our safety. But what is happening right now on that bridge is that when families make this 2,000-mile journey from Honduras or El Salvador or Guatemala, some of the deadliest places on the planet today, places that are also experiencing historic droughts, what they are trying to grow is not producing anything for those communities. They cannot feed themselves, and they're having to leave. They're doing what any human being would do in the same set of conditions. They make it all the way here to the United States border, where Texas meets Chihuahua. And in an unprecedented move, this administration does not allow them to follow our own asylum laws, to set foot in the United States, to cross the international boundary line on that bridge, and to seek asylum, which, as you may know, does not guarantee them lifelong access to the United States. They're not going to be able to take anyone's benefits or place in school or job. It just allows them to lawfully petition for asylum, especially if they can prove that they're not able to return back to their home country without endangering themselves or their kids. What this administration has done is stopped them from being able to set foot in this country and told them to remain in Mexico, in Ciudad Juarez, which is itself not the safest place in the world today. In fact, within the last 9 years, in 2010, 2011, Ciudad Juarez was the deadliest place on the planet, bar none. And these refugees, there are now more than 10,000 of them in Ciudad Juarez, penniless, strangers in a strange land, speaking neither English nor Spanish in some cases, many speaking an indigenous language from the Northern Triangle of Central America, are in shelters at best, and in the worst case scenarios, they are on the streets. Pray to those who would take advantage of people who are at their most miserable, their most desperate, their most vulnerable moment. We ask them to remain in place. It's a policy known as metering. We talked to some of those families at this shelter called Casa del Migrante. We met a young woman, she's 19 years old, came with her family from Honduras. All of her family members were able to go forward into California, where they are now, but because she is over the age of 18, Karen is 19 years old, she had to stay behind in Juarez. Imagine you're 19-year-old, or when you were 19 years old, being stopped, staying in a shelter, not knowing when or if you will ever join your family again, trying to navigate the U.S. legal code without the aid of an attorney or without speaking the English language. We met a father and a mother and their 4-year-old son who traveled 6 days through the Chihuahuan desert on foot, wore out their shoes. He was talking about the broiling sun on his back, on his neck, on his head, and as his shoes wore out, the boiling hot sand that he was walking on with his 4-year-old son on his shoulders. One of the people with whom he was traveling died of thirst, dehydration, exhaustion, not in a cage, not separated from her family, not deported back to another country, dead. More than 8,000 of our fellow human beings have died making that same crossing just in the last 20 years. And the walls that we build, the militarization at the border, consigns more to greater suffering and greater levels of death, just like that woman with whom that family was traveling. They get to the United States, they kiss the ground upon which they arrive, they turn themselves into, do not try to flee from, a Border Patrol agent who takes them into a freezing icebox of a jail cell in a Border Patrol station. They go from extreme heat to extreme cold, freaked out, doesn't know what's going to happen to them next, spend 3 days there before they reported back to Ciudad Juarez, waiting in line. I think they were number 7,023 in line to be processed here in the United States, which, to remind everybody, is the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet. Almost everyone here is descended from those who came here as asylum seekers or refugees or immigrants, or in some cases brought here in bondage against their will to literally build the wealth of this country. But in every instance are what made us great and strong and successful and powerful in the first place. And this is what we are doing to those families. We then crossed the river and went to a Border Patrol station in Clint, Texas. This is where you may have read the reports from the AP and the New York Times and other media outlets that we have been keeping hundreds of children who have been separated from their parents, happening now, right now, in this moment in 2019. Toddlers as young as 5 months old, teenagers as old as 17, none of them knowing each other, kids taking care of kids, not having diapers on for the little kiddos, which means they're pooping in their pants and that poop rolls down onto the floor. That floor, that concrete floor, is the same floor that every single one of those kids will be sleeping on underneath aluminum blankets in overcrowded conditions where some people are standing on the toilets so that they can just get some air to breathe because they are far overcrowded, well beyond the capacity that those cells can hold. And that's what we're doing to those kids right now. And inexplicably, this administration has argued that we don't have to provide diapers or soap or toothpaste or showers to kids who are absolutely defenseless in the face of this cruelty. Kids who may not know when or if they're ever going to see their parents again. But here's the bright spot in all this. When we showed up to that Border Patrol station, there were nearly 300 people outside holding vigil, testifying to their fellow Americans just what was being done in their name, transmitting it through Facebook Live or Instagram or other social media channels. Members of the media and the press, not the enemy of the people, but the best defense against tyranny, broadcasting these images out so that the rest of America knows what is happening. I guarantee you, it is the only way that we're going to force the kind of change that we need to see for those kids, for those families waiting in Mexico, for this country, and for our conscience. Imagine my kids, imagine your kids, years down the road, knowing just what was happening here in America in 2019. They're going to want some answers from all of us. How did we account for our behavior, our action, or inaction in the face of this injustice? The fact that 7 children have died over the last year in U.S. Customs and Border Protection custody. That is on all of us in this great democracy. But here was this great democracy springing into action. People showing up, standing up to be counted in this remote stretch of the Chihuahuan Desert. Not easy for you to get to from Ames, Iowa, or almost any other part of the country. And in conclusion, let me just tell you what it reminds me of on this incredibly important, historic day. It's the fact that in 1964, July 2nd, President Lyndon Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act. Now, he didn't do it because he was the most enlightened president we've ever had, although we are proud of him from the state of Texas. He didn't do it because of the enlightened members of Congress who voted for it, or managed that bill through the House and the Senate, though we are grateful to them as well. He did it because of people, just like those young people that we saw outside of the Clint Border Patrol station, who were willing to stand up when it counted, sometimes at the very risk of their lives. I think about the campaign in Birmingham, Alabama, in April and May of 1963. School kids, in the same age as those kids who were locked up in that Border Patrol station in Clint, took to the streets of downtown Alabama. On the first day, as young as 9 years old, they were arrested, more than 1,200 of them, in the Birmingham County Jail, standing up for the full civil rights of every child, of every woman, of every man in that community. And those protests continued day after day after day. It was the people against Bull Connor. It was the people against injustice. It was the people against segregation and racism and the legacy of slavery. And the people were hell-bent on winning that struggle. And ultimately they did, because they forced President John Fitzgerald Kennedy to do the right thing. Now listen, he's one of my favorite presidents. He was a good man. He was an Irish Catholic. But he did not take on the task of introducing that civil rights legislation on his own. He was forced to do it by people who wanted to demand that this country live up to its potential, live up to its promise, and live up to its values. Those freedom riders who preceded the Birmingham campaign, the Greensboro Four, the Friendship Nine, who risked their lives at those lunch counters, were arrested for being human beings in their own country. They are the ones who made that political change possible. So, for those of you who wonder what we do in the face of this injustice and this torture that we are visiting on our fellow human beings at the U.S.-Mexico border, just know there is powerful precedent before us of people standing up at these moments of truth to force the hand of this country. And that is in part why I'm running right now. I hope that is in part why you are here right now. I want to make sure that I can answer my kids, look them in the eye when they ask us what we did in 2019 when this was going on in our country. And you look at any challenge we face beyond the border and immigration and separated families and kids in cages, Whether it's a healthcare system where millions are left to fend for themselves because we don't have the political will to offer them insurance and care, or an economy where too many are working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet, or the challenge of climate, which perhaps in Iowa you understand better than anyone because just this year, both the Missouri River and the Mississippi River had the highest level of flooding in all of recorded history for those 2 rivers. To meet any single one of these challenges, we're going to need every single one of us to come together. In rooms like these, in streets in downtown Des Moines, we saw that protesters came into one of the congressional representatives' offices today to protest those conditions on the border. It's that kind of direct action from our fellow Americans that produces the change that allows us to be who we were intended to be in the first place. So, to all of you who came out here tonight, all of you who are going to demand justice at the border or on any other of these issues, know that we are with you. I'm grateful to be running with you. And I came not only to share with you my thoughts, but to listen and learn from you. So looking forward to your questions, your comments, your ideas. Thank you, Joan and Dan, for welcoming the O'Rourkes. And thank you all for what you're doing right now. Gracias. Cynthia Connell, on the right side of the room, has got a microphone. She's going to do her best to get that microphone to you. And then I'm going to do my best to listen to you, answer your question, or just hear your comment or your idea.
Hi, I'm Catherine Garrett. I'm actually from Independence, where you're going to be in a couple days. But my half an hour away from here, about in Nevada, my brother was working in a liquor store. An alarm went off because he was new to the job, and the police were alerted. His boss called the police and told them not to come in because it wasn't an emergency. But the police came in anyway, saw a black man in the store, and drew a gun on him. He, luckily, was saved by his boss arriving in the nick of time. But I want to ask you, do you have any plans to diffuse the tensions between the black community and the police?
Yeah. Catherine, thank you for asking the question and having the courage to share a very personal, very difficult story. Hopefully we all agree that no one in this country should have to fear those who are sworn to serve and protect us, who are put in this position of public trust, are carrying a firearm and have the ability to deprive us of our liberty and our life even. And yet too many do, and too many do based on their race. A difference that should have no distinction, should not matter in this country, and yet it does. The alarming number of unarmed black men and women who have lost their lives at the hands of law enforcement in this country is unconscionable and must be stopped. What do we do as a country? What could I do as president? Number one, we could ensure that our Department of Justice and the Civil Rights Division investigates and fully prosecutes every use of force that is unwarranted against a person of color in this country by a local police force. Two, we could tie federal funds to sheriff's offices and police departments to their ability to have full transparency and full reporting on use of force and against whom it is used. Three, we need to make sure that there's real accountability, consequences, and justice at the end of the day, or else this is just going to continue to happen year after year to person after person. But the last thing, and this is the hardest among them, there are some real bad actors in our police departments, and they should be rooted out. The vast majority of them, I hope most of us can acknowledge, are doing a really difficult job under trying circumstances. I want to support them to the best of our ability, make sure that they have the training necessary in situations like the one that you just described to make the right decision, that we support them in this difficult job, and that we also hold them accountable so that the entire force is not tarnished by the bad actions of a few. But I think we have to put them in the context of a country that is fundamentally, in almost every single institution, racist in terms of the access and the outcomes that we see, because it's not just in law enforcement, and it's not just the criminal justice system, where you have 2.3 million people behind bars, and they're disproportionately comprised of people of color. In Iowa, I think African Americans comprise about 3% of the population, and about 25% of the incarcerated population in the state. That does not make sense to me. That is not just, that is not right. But it's not just in those arenas. In healthcare, Amidst a maternal mortality crisis, it is 3 times as deadly for women of color in this country right now. In education, in a kindergarten classroom, a 5-year-old child is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled if he or she is a child of color in this country. In the economy, 10 times the wealth in white America than there is in black America. So I see this challenge and this very real threat that you describe in law enforcement in a larger context of a system that is the legacy of not just slavery, but ongoing segregation and suppression and the effects of Jim Crow in this country. Until we face that and fully understand it, until the full story of America and everyone in America, I don't think we're ever going to change the fundamentals that are causing these problems. We'll never begin the repair that is necessary, and we will never stop visiting this kind of injustice on future generations. So I gave you the immediate steps I would take as president, but I think we need a much larger conversation to address the bigger picture that we see here in the United States. Thanks for the question, Catherine. Appreciate it.
In a country where the majority of the population struggles to make ends meet working minimum wage jobs at places like Walmart, would a universal basic income help?
You know, it might. I'm not convinced that that is the best path forward to address the very real problem that you just described. I mentioned in my comments that you've got so many working 2 or 3 jobs. In this state, you have so many school teachers working 2 and 3 jobs. When I want them focused on just one job, that child and her lifelong love of learning, which once we unlock it, there's no stopping her and there's no stopping this country. So paying people a living wage, allowing teachers in Iowa the ability to organize and collectively bargain so they can demand better wages and working conditions and deliver better education to their students is a great place to start. Having a minimum wage in this country whose floor is set at $15 an hour, so no working American has to work a second job to make ends meet and can spend time with their families reading to their child before the first day of kindergarten so that kid has a little bit of a better chance to start. Paid family leave, so that if someone in your household is ill, you can take time off to take care of them without losing your job or the income upon which you depend. Paid childcare, so that it's affordable so that you can go into the workforce or complete your education. And then healthcare. If we do all of that, then the millions of jobs that we are creating in this country today that we are not filling because we don't have folks who are well enough to work those jobs or educated enough to work those jobs or don't have the skills training necessary to work those jobs or have not been able to join a union and enter an apprenticeship to learn the trades to work those jobs, we can fix those problems. And I think we can put more people to work. And I think then you have an economy that works for everybody. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it. Yes, Ms. Connell.
Hello, my name is Kate, and thank you for mentioning that we're having really bad rain today. The Midwest and a lot of the United States has been affected by flooding and just really horrible climate sort of emergencies. What kind of plans or thoughts do you have about the ways that climate change really threatens farmers and rural America specifically?
I've learned from listening to farmers here in Iowa that we are seeing, I think, the wettest 12-month period in recent history, or maybe in history in Iowa. Those here will know the answer to that question. We've seen the windows close on farmers whose fields are too wet to be able to plant. We're seeing the ability to pass that farm on to the next generation, to your daughter or to your son, compromised because you're seeing historic low farm incomes, farmers who are underwater in debt, and now farmers whose entire fields are lakes. We saw that in the southwest part of the state outside of Pacific Junction, soybean farm. And I remember passing the bins that had burst because the stored soybeans had soaked up all of the water and burst the sides of the bin, and just the smell was overpowering. And that was a smell in some ways of defeat. I just imagined all of the hours of labor that went into planting and to working those fields, and all of that is now lost because of the flooding, but also lost because that grain was stored, because it wasn't in China, because that market was closed down to those farmers, because we started a trade war and tariffs that ensured that they weren't going to be able to make the profit necessary to keep that farm going. So of all of those issues, the most existential for those farmers, for our country, and for this planet is climate change. The Missouri spilling its banks, the highest level of runoff in the history of that river. We know that that's not an anomaly. We know that the warming of this planet caused by you and me, our emissions, and then our inaction collectively in the face of the facts, that has caused those storms and that runoff and that flooding, the fires in California, the droughts in other parts of the world. How do we combat this? We free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels. We fully embrace renewable energy technology. We invest in the next generation of wind and solar and battery storage technology that allows us to distribute that stored energy at will onto the grid. We put farmers in the driver's seat. We ensure that they can plant cover crops at a profit to pull more carbon out of the air and sequester more of it in the soil. Regenerative grazing and agriculture being pioneered right here in Iowa. Let's pay those farmers and ranchers for the environmental services that they are providing. And then let's make sure that communities like Pacific Junction, which are on the front lines of climate change, that we make an investment in them to make sure that they are safe when the next storm comes, because we know that they're going to continue to be hit by climate change going forward. If all of us do all that we can, then the United States can take a global leadership role in convening other countries to do their part. And then there's a chance that we keep this planet from warming another 2 degrees Celsius. Our plan calls for net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and getting halfway there by 2030, which is just a little more than 10 years from now. It is an historic investment on the part of everybody, but I know that we can do it. This is the challenge of this generation, and I'm confident that we are up to it. Thanks for asking the question.
Okay, right here, same place.
Hi there. I'm Ethan, and I'm an ACLU Rights for All voter. To dive back into the, to put it lightly, problems on the border, one of the main tools ICE has relied upon is ICE detainers, and in making sure that a lot of local law enforcement has to help them find immigrants in our communities who may or may not, well, for the most part, not being a problem. What actions will you take action to disentangle ICE from local law enforcement and, importantly, end ICE detainers?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. When people in our communities fear law enforcement, fear that police officer, fear that sheriff's deputy, because they don't know if when they report a crime, they will be investigated for violating immigration laws and held and deported back to another country, then we are demonstrably less safe. Fewer people then report crimes or serve as witnesses or testify in trials. And it's not just me saying that. That's police chiefs and sheriffs that I've listened to all over this country and certainly along the U.S.-Mexico border. No reason for these ICE raids and roundups that the president has threatened and that he has employed under his administration, and that we've also seen under the administrations of Democrats and Republicans alike before him, breaking up families, deporting hundreds of thousands of people who are working the toughest jobs here in Iowa and in the United States, does not make us safer or better. In fact, it diminishes the standing of this country and our security. So while I think there will still be some need for internal enforcement against someone who poses a violent risk to our communities, there's no need to break up families, deporting people who pose no serious violent threat to us. That's number one. Number two is then rewriting our immigration laws so that folks who are here are legalized, can come forward, can register with the government. We know who is in our community. They can contribute even more to their potential and to this country's greatness, free more than 1 million dreamers from any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens, and then ensuring that the 9 million legal permanent residents, green card holders, are able to become U.S. citizens as well as soon as possible. All of that makes this country stronger economically and also makes us safer and more secure. So doing the right thing also makes us safe in this instance. Thanks for asking the question.
Okay, I know it's really warm, so this will be our last question, then we're going to go to the front porch.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is Laura Moreland, and I've been an advocate with the Alzheimer's Association for over 25 years since my dad was first diagnosed. This is a huge, huge problem, and obviously I'm a little emotional about it. But Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States, and here in Iowa, we are the 7th highest state in terms of Alzheimer's deaths. So we need a plan, not only for research, but also for more caregiving facilities, more caregiving training, because Alzheimer's is the only disease in the top 10 causes of death that does not have an effective prevention, treatment, or cure. So what are you gonna do?
Thanks for being here. And I'm assuming that it's not just at this town hall meeting, but in your congressional representative's office, in your state rep's office. I know that from having served in Congress for 6 years and all these great advocates who came to our office to make the case that it is so much more cost effective to invest up front in the cures to these conditions, given what we are spending on long-term care in this country right now. My kiddos never met my grandmother. She died of Alzheimer's, and we saw the significant deterioration in her quality of life and her ability to connect with any of us that grew up with her or that she helped to raise. So from a personal level, I want to make sure that we get this right. I don't want other families to have to experience that. In our administration, we will double the investment that we're making in the National Institutes of Health. It's $2.5 billion a year right now in Alzheimer's research. We'll double that to $5 billion. But we will also make sure, to your second part of your question, that the long-term care necessary for an improved quality of life for those Americans who every working day of their lives contributed to the success of this country, paid in to Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid, who made sure that we're the greatest country on the face of the planet, we now have a debt that we need to repay to them by making sure that in their older age and as they struggle against the oncoming of Alzheimer's, that we're there to take care of them as well. So expanding investment in caregiving facilities and making sure that caregivers are paid a living wage, which so often is not the case in this country. That's going to improve the quality of care. But the long-term goal is to invest enough at NIH so that we get the cure. As you said, it's one of the few diseases that we have in this country where there's no real preventable action that we can take or medication that will significantly improve outcomes. So thank you for the question. Really appreciate it. All right, Cynthia said we're going to take some questions outside on the front porch for those who've been waiting. Thank you all for welcoming us. Joan, Dan, thank you for having us. Baby Will, wherever he went, we're grateful to you. Really appreciate it, y'all, and hope to see you back soon.
Thank you
very much. Yeah.